What did you tell Boris Johnson when you met him?
You know when
What does that noise mean?
No, but you know when you see a public persona and you think, okay, but when you go behind closed doors, it'll be a different type of person with depth.
Mm-hmm.
No. No.
Welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. This week's guest is a deputy leader of the SDLP, Nichola Mallon. It's such a volatile time for politics in Ireland and Britain that I thought it was really important to ask someone like Nichola down to talk about what's happening with Brexit, what's happening in the north, the chances of a deal being reached that could actually remove the threat of a no deal, which will be catastrophic for Ireland, north and south. But it was a much broader conversation than that about the nature of politics in Northern Ireland and the nature of politics in the world, how it feels like to be a politician making a reasonable point in a world that only wants to hear the loudest, most extreme voices. Nichola was a really fascinating guest to talk to, and just charting her experiences from a girl who went to trade union meetings with her father in North Belfast to somebody who is now deputy leader of the SDLP, and wondering how they can make a difference and how she can make a difference in, as I say, a world where the more extremes are always listened to. Before we go to that, don't forget to subscribe to Ireland Unfiltered on all the usual channels, and if you like the show, please leave a review. Nichola Mallon, welcome to Ireland Unfiltered.
Thank you. Deputy
Leader of the SDLP. You managed to find some time in this extraordinary era to come and talk to us. It's Friday afternoon as we're recording, and I wonder, we don't know what's going to have happened by the time this actually goes out because things happen so quickly. But have you ever experienced in your time in politics, have you ever known a situation as fraught and as unpredictable as this?
No, I haven't. I mean, you always expect in politics that there's twists and turns, but this is just on a whole new level at the point where, you're basically having to keep up nearly on an hourly basis to see what's happening in Westminster. And then obviously we have the crazy situation in the north where we haven't had a government for nearly 3 years. So it is, I think, completely unprecedented times. And I think we're living in, a real historical and defining moment.
You're a member of the Assembly. What do you do as a member of the Assembly when there is no Assembly?
I don't do what I would like to be doing. I don't get to do all of it. So obviously, part of my role is to be serving my constituents. It's a really important part to me. So I continue to do that. But I don't get to scrutinise government departments. I don't get to move forward legislation or to be part of lawmaking, which is a really important aspect of it. So you're severely curtailed. And then it also has a knock-on effect because when people come to you with issues, you say, for example, they have a child with special needs, they're struggling to get, help in schools or a statement. That requires systemic change. So you're very frustrated as well because you're shouting and battling on an individual basis when you know deep down that if you really are going to help people, then you have to make systemic changes. And to do that, you need a government and you need an assembly.
But why hasn't that happened then? Because presumably every member of the assembly is experiencing the same frustrations that you're experiencing.
I don't know because, they must be getting the same level of casework that I'm getting, but clearly it's about political priorities. The DUP and Sinn Féin are locked in a battle that's primarily about the Irish Language Act because we witnessed that in February when they thought they had a deal. But I genuinely don't know because, as a politician, you should have a huge sense of responsibility. We can see the state of our public services. We can see what's happening with Brexit. We can see what's happening in terms of instability in our peace process, and surely that should be an impetus for all of us to get round the table and work out our differences because we've had really hard and difficult political journeys to come through before. Think of the Good Friday Agreement. People were able to do it with leadership and with compassion and, courage. And I think we need to get that back again.
But, you say it's about the Irish Language Act, but has it now become, is it morphed into something more? And is it something that's harder to resolve than that?
I think it's simplistic to say it is just about an Irish Language Act, but if you look back to February when, there was a deal on the table to get the institutions back up and running, it didn't mention the Bill of Rights, it didn't mention equal marriage or any of the other things that are cited in that long list.
Yeah.
It was all about the Irish language. I've heard Sinn Féin say that if, they could get the basis of that February deal, that would be a basis for them to go back in. But I think it's a problem that you have right across the board where politics now is all about rhetoric and it's all about slogans and sound bites, and we're not getting into the detail of what it actually means. So when people say no return to the status quo, what does that exactly mean? People need to understand that. There's not the space, and that's certainly not being spelt out, and that's certainly a frustration for me.
When you say that, and you talk about the rhetoric, like how trying is it for you as a politician to be in that environment, as a person to be in an environment where there are people who are unbending on both sides, and not just on the assembly, but when we'll talk more about Brexit now, but like on the backstop, on areas like that where there are people who, against all reason and against all evidence, hold a position. Like, how frustrating is that to be part of it or to be witnessing it?
Well, to me, it's very simple. You're either going to be and want to be part of the solution, or you're going to be part of the problem. I have a lot of problems in a job as a politician. I think I've got maybe an old-fashioned sense of it, that your job is to solve problems for people and then it's to improve their quality of life. And part of that is compromise. You're never going to get every single thing that you want. But it seems now that compromise is almost a sign of weakness, and everything is a game of chicken. And that's what politics, I think, is in danger of becoming. It's becoming just a game of chicken to see who's going to blink first. That's whether it's the DUP or Sinn Féin in the north, or whether it's Boris Johnson with the EU. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be in.
Is there a case almost to be said that England has actually sort of taken on the worst aspects of the sort of polarised politics of, not the worst aspects of Northern Ireland at its worst, but that polarised politics, you're on one side or the other, that seems to have spread and maybe linked to the rise of English nationalism, like that polarising aspect is part of that.
I think English society is very polarised. I think that there is a lot of anger, and a lot of it is justifiable in communities because, they are struggling to make ends meet. They aren't seeing an improvement in their quality of life. Public services have been cut. And I think a lot of politicians have directed that anger away from Parliament, away from their own locally elected representatives, over to Brussels, and they're feeding on that. And I think that that's reprehensible. I don't think it's responsible at all.
But you talk about like the situation in the north now, and we've seen as we sit here on Friday, we've seen stories again about a Northern Ireland only backstop, and whether a story that the DUP are prepared to bend on that a little bit. How much credence do you put to that, and how, do you think we are getting closer to a deal on that?
Yeah, I think that if I was in the DUP, the one thing that I would be certain of is that when it becomes politically expedient for Boris Johnson, he will throw the DUP under a bus. It's amazed me that, I don't expect the DUP to be sitting down with the SDLP and taking on all of our positions, but surely to God, it has to listen to all of the business community that are very clear that a no-deal Brexit is catastrophic. We've seen there that the biggest delegation of business people from Northern Ireland, 300 of them went across to England, 100 of them met with the Prime Minister, and they all said to him that you need to get a deal. I think the DUP have realised that they're on a hook. And I think that what we're seeing now is they're trying to reposition. And I do believe we've seen them softening around, agriculture and having an all-Ireland zone. We see this in the Times today that they are moving towards an or Northern Ireland only backstop. Only time will tell, but I do think that it's important that, it is a difficult time, and if parties are in difficult positions, they need to be given the space to try to come out of that.
Yeah.
So lambasting them and continually poking them in the eye and painting them in a corner is not going to do any of us any good. It might be good and grabbing a couple of headlines. It might play to a base in terms of your electorate, but it's not going to solve the problem that we're facing. So I think we need to be a bit more mature.
Who's been doing that?
Well, I think that there's been a number of politicians since this has came out that have, kind of gone at them. This is a U-turn, this is them bending, just using language that isn't useful.
Yeah.
If it is a bit of a U-turn, it is a U-turn. But you know what? Let's sit down and have a sensible, reasonable, mature conversation about it, because, it's people's lives and livelihoods. It's our peace process that's under threat. And if people need the space to come out of a cul-de-sac, then we should give it.
Looking at the Lord Ashcroft poll this week, and the headline was the slight majority in favour of a united Ireland. But if you go down into the other figures, it did really reveal the polarisation that is at the heart of all this. 82% of unionists think the backstop has been exaggerated. 19% of unionists think leaving with no deal would cause negligible problems for Northern Ireland, where there isn't even a figure for nationalists. They didn't even poll high enough to make a figure. So that's an extraordinary divide when you think about, and we go back to the kind of reason and rationality of things, and yet 19% of people on one side believe something will have no effect when everybody is saying it will have an effect.
Yeah, so,
how do you explain that?
I think maybe there are two things. Northern Irish society has become polarised because we have had the political vacuum. Okay, it's not the entire reason, but it plays down. And then I think we have the other issue where people don't trust the information that they're being given. People don't know what is factual or not, and people are only reading news that reinforces their own position, or they're only listening to people who hold the same position as them. So they're not reading widely across, they're not taking conflicting pieces of evidence or facts and drawing their own conclusion. They're just reinforcing their own view, which means that they're very much closed. And that's a concern as well, because we need to be kind of open to try to understand where other people coming for, understand the facts instead of listening to the spin. So I think what you're seeing is all of that coming together, and you can see the division in polls like that. And we can see it. We can see it in the street when you're going down doing your ordinary thing, shopping. People are stopping to say, and people have very strongly held views on it, and they don't seem to be willing to move off it, whether it's based on fact or not.
Are you a victim of that as a party because you have, a reasonable position and you're kind of in the middle?
Well, after the referendum result, I think it was the next day, we called for special status for Northern Ireland because we recognised our unique position. And we have gone widely to engage with businesses, with farmers, to hear their view of the impact. So, we have really tried to be thoughtful in taking our position. We genuinely believe that, staying in the customs union, the single market is good. And we have argued, because we believe in it, that the backstop is a necessary insurance.
But do you think, compared to, say, the Sinn Féin, do you think Sinn Féin are as committed to Remain as the SDLP are?
I think Sinn Féin, because they've been ambivalent on Europe, they've been against, and then recently they've been for, causes a bit of confusion. I think that for me, in the immediate aftermath of the referendum result, I think it was nearly in the early hours of the morning, Sinn Féin called for a border poll, and they've been continually doing that. And I think for unionism, that is, we're entitled to call for a border poll, but in this context, unionism is, I feel, feeling very insecure, and it sees this as a threat. And I think conflating the issue of Europe and the backstop with a border poll is not helpful at this time,
So would you say they're Sinn Féin, their goal is United Ireland? Well, the SDLP want to unite Ireland too, but do you think the priority or the emphasis from their point of view is too much weighed towards United Ireland to the detriment of even things like the peace process?
Well, I can only judge on what I hear, and they're continuously calling for a border poll, and that's fine. But the issue that I have is that we have a really divided society, more divided than ever. And so where's all the work around reconciliation? Where's all the work about trying to reach out to other people to reassure them? Where's all the work around trying to shape what we have termed it many years ago a new agreed Ireland would be like? And that's completely missing. So that's a piece of work that I think needs to be done. And the message is important, but the messenger is also very important. And I think that if we're speaking about Sinn Féin, the fact that they appointed Gerry Adams, for example, as their spokesperson in Irish Unity, we have to be mindful of the message that all of these things send out without denying who you are and your aspirations. I'm an Irish nationalist, feel very strongly about it. But I recognise that our society is deeply divided. We have growing instability. We have attacks on our police. You know, we've seen Lyra McKee being murdered. So we're at really turbulent times. And I think it would be good if we all toned down the rhetoric and we all got together to see what we can do to try to improve the lives of everybody in Northern Ireland, and to have those conversations about what a new agreed Ireland would be like, because it has been accelerated by Brexit. There's no doubt about that.
And do you think that's like, where do you see it ending? Where do you, or not, you know, where do you see it in 10 years?
I don't know. I don't really like doing predictions because you always end up with egg in your face. So I try not to do it. Where I would like to see us is that I would like to see us we have an assembly. I would like to see us in part of a new agreed Ireland. But for me, the big thing is around the type of society that we have. You know, so I would like to see a society where we've done a lot to tackle poverty, where there's social justice underpinning us, where we have fairness. You know, those are the things that are really important to me. My driving force in politics is I'm really angry when I see that your postcode or where you're born can dictate to still a large extent your life chances. You know, those are the things that get me into politics. Those are the things that I think we should all be working towards.
Is there, you talk about reconciliation there, and it's something that on this show has become a kind of a theme with a lot of guests because of the situation we live in. Like, not just reconciliation in the north, but a kind of, if we're going to have a united Ireland, like some sort of understanding in the south about, you know, assimilating a million unionists who we seem to demonise. Like, how do we, if we're going to have a united Ireland, what do we do to actually change how we feel about people who we want to be part of our country? So why isn't there more, first of all, why isn't there more of a sort of interest in that, do you think? Is it because of the polarization? And why also then the SDLP still struggle to kind of, you know, post-peace process? Why does it remain kind of flatlining?
So there's a couple of things in there. Yeah. Maybe if I deal very frankly with the SDLP issue, I think that, you know, the SDLP contributed hugely to peace and to the Good Friday Agreement, and under the leadership of John Hume. I think when you reflect on that, we paid a significant price for that in terms of a party. We had issues around, you know, we put a lot of stock in our leadership. We didn't do proper succession planning. And, you know, I think as well that we have great representatives, but I think there was perhaps a feeling that because of our achievements in the past, you know, maybe a lot of us could have coasted on that.
Right, okay.
And we needed to kind of roll up our sleeves and get back into that. So I think that maybe as part of the SDLP's journey on it, I think that in Northern Ireland, and I think we're seeing this in politics right across, it's become a zero-sum game. And, you know, you either win or you lose. It's very adversarial when you're a party that's trying to say, well, look, you know, why don't we sit down together? I'm not going to, like, we're holding our hands up saying, you know, I'm not going to get everything that I want, you know, but we need to be working together. It sounds like it's very glib, but it's actually the way it gets stuff done. That's what's happened in Northern Ireland, particularly when you're coming from a position of conflict. Parties have to sit down, they have to compromise, and they have to want to do things for the greater good. It seems to me at the minute that parties, and I'd say really, particularly the DUP and Sinn Féin, are just playing to a core vote. And I think that's part of the difficulty, and it's very difficult then to get your message out into the middle of that, because as I said before, it's almost like compromise is now a sign of weakness.
But is it even more like fundamental than that? Because you look at, say, Sinn Féin, and they've 7 seats in the House of Commons. The House of Commons has become this crucible where everything is taking place. So much as, you know, it's being prorogued, it's trying to stop no deal, all these things. Every vote counts. Now, whatever you feel about abstentionism, surely a party that is saying we're going to go there and vote should be more popular, and should have people saying, well, that's what we need. We need representation there. But why doesn't that result in a kind of pickup for the SDLP?
Well, I think Parliament now in Westminster, you know, every single vote is crucial and critical. So it has an extra relevance now that it perhaps didn't have before. We're going to be getting into a Westminster election, and our message is very clear on that every single vote counts, that this is a matter of stopping Boris and stopping Brexit. And we're going to be standing clearly, you know, on that platform. My question, I have put it to Sinn Féin, and I haven't really had an answer back, is I understand their policy of abstentionism and they stand on that, they have a mandate for that. But sometimes there comes a point when you have to do what is in the country's interest. And I don't know how their abstentionism right now, given everything that's happening, is in the country's interest. I suppose that's a question you would have to put to them.
Yeah, but what do you mean? What do you mean you understand their policy? Because it seems to me whenever people raise abstentionism with Sinn Féin, it's explained away as well. You know, you have to understand this is their policy, as if it's like Jacob Rees-Mogg has a policy on leaving the EU, but it doesn't mean that it's a fundamentalist belief of him. It's a core tenet of his belief system. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's good for the country. And so surely you can question Sinn Féin's.
We do, because we stand. But what I'm saying is they make no bones about the fact that they're abstentionists, so they go to the electorate and that's the platform that they stand on. I mean, my view is if you're not going to go to the Parliament anywhere, because we would go anywhere to represent the people of Northern Ireland, right? We take that role very seriously. We don't think it diminishes who we are as Irish nationalists. But I suppose, for Sinn Féin, they stand on that ticket. Everybody knows it. And for me, if they're not going to go to Parliament, wherever that is, to represent people, then why don't they stand aside and let those of us who want to go there to represent people stand and do it?
Why don't you think they stand aside then?
Because it's about the growth of Sinn Féin.
And that's it?
I think so, yes.
And does that come back to as well why they're, we come back to reconciliation then, and is there an interest in Sinn Féin in having a polarised society rather than saying let's make it an agreed reconciled Ireland rather than a slightly polarised united Ireland? Well,
I think that if any party or politician is serious about reconciliation, then it should be demonstrable by your actions. We can talk is cheap. So we can say that we're interested in reconciliation, and we can appoint people whose role it is to do unionist outreach, but it's around what are you actually doing? And really, when you're examining what we're all doing to try to forward reconciliation, we are not even sitting down to form a government to try to deal with some of the difficult issues around poverty, around deprivation, and then we wonder why we see the fracturing in our society and we see it being even more polarised in our working class communities. So the question that I always say is, if you're serious about it, then show me what you're doing. And from what I can see, there's not much reconciliation work going on either between the DUP or Sinn Féin out into wider society.
But do you feel that's reflected by people? Is there a desire among people for that? Because you talk about the polarised society, you talk about the zero-sum game. So, maybe it is a failure of the SDLP, of succession planning and all these things, but the fact that you're struggling and you're on the margins really doesn't give much hope for people who think the SDLP are going to provide an answer to this.
Well, the SDLP is the third largest party in Northern Ireland, so I wouldn't write us off completely.
Right.
And we have a younger leadership, and we brought a lot of new people forward, and we are a party in renewal. But I'm not going to lie, it's very difficult to get your message across. And, we have to continue to do it, and Rome wasn't built in a day. I think the big challenge for us is that, so many people in Northern Ireland are just fed up with politics and politicians. They haven't had a government for, nearly 3 years now. And they're kind of the view that all politicians are wastes of space. Yeah. So those are the people, I think, that probably, their minds aren't closed and they're open to listening to different views. But when they're deliberately being disengaged from politics and they're deliberately, being fronted all the time with this zero-sum politics, this very aggressive rhetoric, they shut off, and they're the people that we're trying to say, look, listen, come out and vote. I know you haven't had a government for 3 years. I know you've been to the polls several times and you still don't have a government, but please, you can change things. You have to come out and vote. And that's a very hard sell, and especially at this moment in time.
What did you tell Boris Johnson when you met him?
When
what does that noise mean?
No, but when you see a public persona and you think, okay, but when you go behind closed doors, it'll be a different type of person with depth. No. No. And that kind of took me aback. It was a very direct meeting.
How long were you with him for?
About 15 minutes, just over 15 minutes. And he began it by a spiel, and I got a little bit cross in the sense that it was very clear that he didn't have any clear understanding of the fragilities and the uniqueness of Northern Ireland. And I was also very cross that he had come over for this flying visit and he wasn't engaging with the business sector, farmers, community groups, the people who are actually going to have to live with the consequences of his tactics and his politics. So my message to him was very clear that, you know, he needed to avoid a hard Brexit. He needed to live up to his responsibilities as a co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. And then I was very clear that, you know, he was in danger of causing damage to relationships between London and Dublin and across these islands, which are really important and have been built up over many years and are critical to our peace process. And I had said that because, you know, he had been Prime Minister for quite some time and he hadn't been engaging with the Taoiseach and there was no plans, you know, so I emphasised to him the importance of building, maintaining and fostering those relationships and to recognise that the DUP's worldview of events in Northern Ireland and their analysis is not the right one.
And what did he say to that?
He said that, look, don't listen to all the doom and gloom and
So it was like
things will be all right.
Yeah, it was just like kind of let's believe and give it a bit of oomph.
Yes,
that stuff.
that was it.
So that when you say, you know, you have a public persona,
Yes.
and then the reality is the same.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about. It was still just platitudes.
Yes, it was exactly the same rhetoric behind closed doors. It was exactly the same body language, that flamboyant, you know, arm movement and trying to be very witty and make us laugh. You know, it was surreal. But it was exactly the person that we have seen in front of the camera was the person in the room with senior government advisors and the Secretary of State and certainly us.
And what was the spiel at the beginning?
It was just about, you know, businesses, everybody's sick and tired of Brexit. We want a deal, but we are prepared for a no deal. And it's not going to be basically as catastrophic as everybody thinks. To which I said, well, you know, the Northern Ireland Civil Service itself, which would be objective, has said we're talking about 40,000 job losses in Northern Ireland. Yeah. And he just, even with his hands, dismissed it as if, you know, it's doom and gloom, you know, it's all hearsay. It'll not be as bad as that. Be positive. He encouraged me to be positive.
How did you take that?
I thought it was extremely patronising, you know.
You said it was bluff and bluster.
Yes, very much so.
Did it scare you?
Yeah, because, you know, politics is becoming a bit of a, you know, a theatre and a soap opera, and it's not. And it's meant to be about improving people's lives. And I thought, here we have someone... We are at a critical point in Northern Ireland in the sense we haven't had a government. We don't have a serious talks process. And, you know, the consequences of this are going to be profound politically, socially, economically. And you don't seem to have a grasp of the detail and you're not willing to engage with those who are going to actually have to live with what you're doing. And so I find it very, very disconcerting, I'll say that.
And did you see any spark of intelligence or any understanding of it? Because we did a film with Peter O'Born last week who went to Besbrook, and you know, Peter O'Born's point of view, you know, he worked with Boris Johnson, and talking to him during it, he said on the film, but he said as well, he found him a guy who had a really great political understanding of any political point. He could take it, advance it, bring it to the next level all the time. Did you get any sense of that intelligence, or was it just the bluster you got?
No, look, I can't make an assessment on the man from a 15-minute meeting.
No, but it's an important 15 minutes.
Yes. Look, he's clearly shrewd. Obviously, he wouldn't be where he is if he wasn't. The question, and I've kind of watched Boris Johnson, you know, over the last wee while, and for me, you know, principles are very important in politics and politicians, and they're important in leadership. And I don't see many principles, and I say that because I watch, you know, that he voted against the withdrawal agreements twice, you know, decried it from the heavens, then voted for it. He promised that he wouldn't prorogue Parliament when he tried to become the leader, then he prorogued it. He said he didn't want an election, and then within 24 hours he's called for one. You know, we've seen now the Civil Service Union in London writing to him to say, we need assurances that you will not try to get civil servants to act unlawfully. I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
He's denied that he lied to the Queen.
He denied, yeah. And I mean, that's just unprecedented that you would have a situation where a Prime Minister is having to be asked, you know, and having to deny that he lied to the Queen. I mean, it's just
what do you
incredible.
think from the point of view, and I know I'm doing a lot of questions about you putting into other people's shoes in the North, which isn't fair, but like if you're the DUP, or if you're one of those unionists who think that backstop is just a figment of the imagination of Remainers, or the damage, you know, these things, and yet, you know, the core, your core belief as a unionist is in the union and in the and the Queen is your head of state, and here you are supporting a man who is saying who has denied lying to the Queen. Like, is there no, like, what point does all that would all those contradictions become sort of, you know, just unmanageable for somebody?
I honestly don't know. I really don't. And I racked my mind to try to understand. I mean, I racked my mind trying to even understand when I came out of that meeting where Boris Johnson was coming from, and then I was relieved that I couldn't actually put myself into his mind, so I felt good about that as a human being. But in all seriousness, there are not a lot of contradictions, and, you know, the backstop and the argument around the economic need of that is not a myth created by nationalists who are surreptitiously trying to get a United Ireland by the back door. The Ulster Farmers Union, business people who are unionists, and very proudly unionists, have been saying very clearly that this is going to put us out of business. So that's what I can't understand. And what I cannot understand is that the DUP in their approach to this, in my view, and linking up with Boris Johnson and with the government and the carry on, is actually almost accelerating us on a pathway towards United Ireland, or at least it's lifting up the conversation. So to me, that's crazy in itself. And I genuinely can't understand why they are doing that, why no one is sitting back, taking a bit of breathing space and saying pragmatically, you know, even if your sole purpose is about, you know, retaining Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom, then this is not the way to be going about it.
But the other thing I don't understand, like, from the point of view, like, the backstop created the conditions for Northern Ireland to be kind of a super state, because you had access to a single market,
the envy of the world.
Yeah, you go anywhere.
I know. That's why it just seems to be it runs contrary to all common sense and to pragmatism.
Yeah.
In terms of, as we would be, as I said, the envy of the world economically, you know, the investment that would come from having all of that status, you know, who could possibly, if they cared about Northern Ireland, not want to see that happening? And then again, when you overlay that with the fact that by sticking to Boris, by setting their face against business and everyone else and driving us towards a cliff edge of economic hardship, why, as a unionist, you would think that is in the interest of retaining the union when we can see what's happening in Scotland?
Is it the responsibility of the people, you know, making that case and who are anti the backstop, if there is a return to violence? Because, you know, there is an argument which is, you know, I get completely, like, this isn't, you know, nothing justifies any return to violence. Like, so, like, the responsibility of return to violence is on the shoulders of the people committing the acts of violence.
Yes.
So you don't, like, but what would you say, what would you identify as a link between the two?
Well, we know when there's times of political instability, we know that if there is infrastructure on the border and there's a hard border, we know what's going to happen, right? The person who pulls the trigger or plants the bomb, they are ultimately responsible. But we know through our history that you have a responsibility to be creating a context for stability and for peace and prosperity. And that's what I can't understand. So if you're creating political vacuums and things happen, you can't just wash your hands off them. It's like I see a lot of politicians, you know, when economic figures come out or employment figures, or there's a really positive investment announcement, they're standing up with a photograph. We delivered that. But when things start to go wrong, they step back. And they're not so quick to put their hand up and say, yes, actually, I'm responsible for that too. And that's what people need to be reflecting on right now. I'm not prone to hyperbole, but I do think genuinely we are in very, very difficult times. We've had the new Chief Constable and Assistant Chief Constable come out and say we're slipping backwards. You know, and they are really concerned as a police force about the implications of a hard Brexit and a hard border.
And they can't be dismissed. Like, this is the thing that's extraordinary, that anything gets dismissed. Operation Yellowhammer gets dismissed as elites. You know, you saw that awful stuff Rees-Mogg said to the neurologist.
Yeah.
Like this, you know, but whoever comes out and offers any counterpoint is dismissed as sort of Project Fear.
Well, I think wasn't it Michael Gove who says we've had enough, we're sick of experts. Yeah. Which just summed it up for me. And that's why I struggle, because I can understand if, you know, if I'm making a case, people will say, well, she would say that because, you know, she's in the SDLP and she's an Irish nationalist and all of these things. But when, you know, big business organisations, when, you know, the CBI, the Institute of Directors are coming out, when the civil service is coming out, when government's own papers are coming out to say, you know, this is going to be catastrophic, why people aren't sitting up and taking notice. And I think it comes back to that point where, you know, people are getting a lot of their information on social media. They're just reading self-reinforcing positions. So that, you know, if someone comes out and says, well, that's all, you know, nonsense, it's just being accepted. I think that's something that's quite worrying.
Explain to me a little bit about how you formed your politics and how you, because your father was a printer.
Yes.
And he took you to union meetings.
Yeah, he was a trade union man.
Right.
Yeah, so like some of my very earliest memories are on May Day. Every May Day we would go down to the parade, and my brother and I, we would have to carry they would have the big banners, and we would carry the ropes. And then afterwards there would be meetings, and, you know, you're a small child, they seem to be very serious conversations. You don't know what they're talking about, but there was a passion. And as you get older, I started to reflect on that. And then obviously I'm from Ardown, I grew up there, and I think it's very difficult to grow up in a place like that, grow up in Belfast at that time and not be absorbing politics. You maybe don't know that it's politics, but it's everywhere, and it's being talked about.
Explain his politics to me a little bit, because you say he was a trade union, he was a printer. Where was he a printer?
He worked out in Lisburn.
Yeah.
He started off, I think, in maybe the Irish News, and he worked around a couple of places.
Okay.
So he was starting off printing newspapers.
Yeah. And well, that was a time when printing unions were very...
they were
really strong and
Rupert Murdoch was around at the time, and so there was a lot of that. So I kind of grew up, and, I remember my dad, with me and my brother, he would ask us, questions a lot. And I remember him saying, he has the most important job, the brain surgeon or a bin man. And we were small children. I don't even know what age we were. And my brother and I were like, yeah, the brain surgeon. And I remember my daddy saying, well, actually, no, because if the bin man didn't come, he wouldn't collect the rubbish. There would be rats. People would get, and,
right.
When I look back, that has really stuck in my mind. And it was just one of those things that, I was just immersed in that. But I never set out to be in politics at all.
But how did that affect you? How do you think that impacted on you growing up in a polarised society, growing up in somewhere like the Ardown, that you were actually getting influence from somebody who was putting the emphasis on the trade union element of things, the sort of the class element of things, if you like, rather than a sectarian or a nationalist, extreme nationalistic element side of it?
Well, I think that's probably led me then towards the SDLP, because it is a party very strong on social justice and about tackling poverty and all of those things, and about transforming lives. So I don't know in my mind exactly how I got there, but I just know that, I had that experience as a child. As I started to get older, I would have got as a teenager very angry about different things.
Right. Your brother called you the Cape Crusaders.
Yeah, where there's a struggle, or, Nichola will be there.
But was your father concerned about, because of the situation, because of the troubles, there must have been a lot of anxiety as well about kids growing up there?
Like most parents, they just tried to teach you the best and tried to give you good decision-making capabilities. My family aren't delighted that I'm in politics, that's for sure. I get regular phone calls, get out of that, get another job. Yeah. Because it's very stressful, and if you're sincere about it and you're genuine, you're there for your constituents, and your constituents just don't have issues between 9 and 5. When I became deputy leader and I was Lord Mayor for a while, you have a very public facing role as well. So your family are very protective of you, and they're kind of saying, is there not another job that you could do to get some satisfaction, less hassle? I think they're worried about.
And you also, we were talking about this earlier, because my son just started school, and you've 3 kids under 5.
Yeah.
4 is the eldest. Yeah. So all that, and I know from talking to people who know you this week that you've always intertwined the two. Your kids come to meetings with you. That's again, I know it myself. It's a strain to try and balance any type of job, but something like that where constituents are looking for you, and you're trying to raise a family.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. When you're an elected representative, you don't get any maternity leave.
Yeah.
So my son is Emmett. He's 6 months. So I either cannot be there for my constituents and just stay at home with Emmett, or I go out and work for my constituents and leave my wee baby at home when he's not even, he's just turned 6 months. So I couldn't do that. So what I do is tuck Emmett under my arm and take him with me. Now, it's not easy, but there's many women that aren't even able to do that.
Yeah.
They just have to put their child into creche or, go out back to full-time work very quickly.
But that's an extraordinary thing that, there's no maternity
I know.
leave.
And I only realised that when I started having children.
Yeah.
And I had my first child, who's now 4, when I was a counsellor in Belfast. There was no maternity, and then my subsequent 2 I've been in MLA, and there's been no maternity. And I've said to Stormont, and I'm very vocal on that if we're going to attract women into politics and young women, then we need to address that, and we need to make the place much more child friendly and family friendly.
Because I saw that even when people jumped back to the Commons last week when they were talking about the day they sat again, and the sitting was from 2 p.m. till 2 in the morning or something, and it's like,
I know.
Someone was making the point, this is nobody, not just politicians but anybody working there, they don't see their families because these are the hours, these archaic hours that were put in to suit men, like 200 men who didn't want to see their family. You know what I mean?
Basically,
I don't want that job. I want to see my family as well. Like, so.
But isn't it interesting that Parliaments, and Stormont has it too, but it doesn't really function, but they have bars, but they don't have creches. Priorities, so we've still a long way to go in that.
Yeah. So your family, you get these calls and they say stay out of politics, but like that's that activism and that sort of social justice awakening that was happening to you was what was leading you into politics. And were you ever tempted by Sinn Féin? Did you ever because you are a nationalist, why didn't you join Sinn Féin?
Because when I was 18, and I've joined a political party because I was studying A-level politics at the time, our politics teacher told us, why do you not think of doing this? I contacted Sinn Féin and I asked for a manifesto, and they didn't send it out. And I then got the SDLPs, and at that time there was John Hume and Nichola Mallon, and I was inspired by them, and I was inspired by what they stood for around the social justice aspects of it and reconciliation. And then I also, believe that no one has the right to take anybody's life in that. And so it was that democratic Irish nationalism that really I found very inspirational, and that's why then I went with the SDLP.
But if they sent you out a manifesto, you might have joined Sinn Féin.
It would have been interesting to see what was in the manifesto. At that time, you think you know it all. You're studying A-level politics. Get me the manifestos. But, my home is in the SDLP. I know that. It hasn't been easy at times. But it definitely is my home. Its values and principles, its history, what it stands for. I feel very passionate about.
Why hasn't it been easy?
Because when you grow up in Ardoyne and you stand for the SDLP, and it seems as if it was something that was nearly going against the norm. And Sinn Féin, are much more popular in then as well. So there's a lot of things.
They're seen as the true believers, and the true kind of custodians of Irish nationalism by many, would you say?
Yeah, by some. So it was kind of a question, God, she's going into politics, and then, which, and it's ignorance too, in the sense, like, so you're from Ardoyne and you joined the SDLP. Like, yeah, I'm proudly from Ardoyne and I'm proudly a member of the SDLP, yes.
Yeah, so it's
just going against the grain, it's.
And then you went to university in Dublin in Trinity.
I did, yes. I went to Trinity.
And how did that then shape your worldview or your view of Ireland? Because one of the things, like, people again will say is that the lack, we talk about the lack of knowledge English people have about Ireland, but the lack of knowledge we have in the south about the north might be not quite the same, but there's an awful lot of ignorance there as well. Did you experience that or encounter that?
Yeah, so coming back to the word anger again, you'll find that's a common motivation for me kind of to do things. I've got a better grip on it now. No, when I came down, that was one of the things. I couldn't believe it. So we came down from the north. I had a chip in my shoulder. I accept that. And studying politics and couldn't understand why people, weren't as clued in about what was happening up in Northern Ireland, or passionate around it when they were studying politics. They had actively chosen to study politics. This was happening on our island. So I was a bit angry at that, to be honest, but I got my eyes opened as well. I realised there's a romanticised view that everyone who lives in Dublin and in other places, want to see United Ireland in the morning. And when you started to peel it back, you thought, God, there's a big level of disconnect. And there is a lack of understanding and there is a lack of awareness. And you know what? It was quid pro quo as well. I came from Belfast, North Belfast, came down, had to learn a lot about what was happening down in Dublin and, all of that. So it was on both sides, to be fair.
And was it just a lack of interest, or was there, because like, when was that, 96, 97?
That was 1998. I went to Trinity, yeah.
So it was just the Good Friday Agreement was just...
So I couldn't understand why everybody was not enthused by this, wanting to talk about it in a politics class, feeling passionately about it.
But they weren't interested and that wasn't. And did you encounter a broader sort of lack of knowledge, like rather than ignorance as well? Like, the people just not, like, was that part of the learning process?
Yeah, well, I think as well. Probably because I had the chip on my shoulder, and I was probably the worst person to go for a couple of pints with out of the politics class, because I'd have been like, yeah, but what about Northern Ireland? And then here she goes again. So it was a bit of that.
Right.
Too,
okay.
it was a bit of that. Here she goes.
But it sort of committed you then to thinking, like, that was, did it harden your sort of commitment to be involved in politics?
I don't know right then if it did. It made me realise that, I was making a lot of assumptions and taking a lot of things for granted. Like that if you were going to study politics at university in Ireland, that you would be conscious of what was happening up in North. So I was I had to grow up. Basically,
right.
When it came back, I then, stayed away from politics for a while. I wasn't active in it, but I kind of found that it just kept coming and picking me back, It's like you think, oh, I don't know about this, I'll try to get away. And then something would happen and you would find yourself back towards the SDLP. And then, a lot of it was I worked hard and a lot of it was I had some really good opportunities and the timing was right for a lot of things to become a councillor. And then our party had the opportunity to be Lord Mayor. I had an opportunity then to be a special advisor to one of our government ministers. So politics has been really good to me in terms of giving me all of those opportunities as well, and the SDLP has.
So, but you were working outside it for a while then?
Yeah, I worked in the civil service and then I worked in the General Medical Council as well. They set up an office in Northern Ireland. It was about regulating doctors, so I worked there for a while as well.
But it was just kept,
Just kept coming back.
Yeah. And talk to me about Mary McAleese, because she's from Ardoyne.
She is.
And she was a kind of inspirational figure for you.
Was. Yeah, because we went to the same primary school and secondary school, and then on our inauguration our school was allowed to send down a delegation, so we went down. And it's that seeing is believing, and seeing that somebody could come from Ardoyne, go through the same schools, and end up as president of Ireland. And then when I was Lord Mayor, one of her last receptions, she allowed me to bring down a group of women from Ardoyne, community workers, and she treated them like royalty. And I just thought she spent a lot of time during her presidency around building bridges and reaching out in reconciliation. And I just found all of that very admirable, and she just did it in her own way. So yeah, she is an inspiration.
You talked about a lot of people there who, you talked about Hume and Mallon, and I guess, like, Mary McAleese, Martin McGuinness, I suppose, like many, again, a sort of a figure who did commit to reconciliation. Yeah. Like, do you worry about the absence of anybody of that stature, as far as I can see, on the landscape at the moment?
Yeah, I think that we really need to see more courageous leadership. And not doing what's always popular, taking risks and stepping forward. And I think that we're not seeing much of that right now. And we're almost all getting into our bunkers. And meanwhile, people are suffering. So, I think one leader is not going to solve it. I think we all need to step up, but there is a vacuum. I think you have to be honest about that.
And what are the things that make you angry today? Do you still have a chip on your shoulder?
Yeah. I always have a chip on my shoulder.
You seem really to have accepted it.
I've accepted it, resigned myself to it. No, I get angry and frustrated when you can change things, but we're choosing not to. All of us, as citizens, people, whatever walk of life, we could all be doing our bit to try to change things, and so many of us are not. And it's a waste. It's a waste of opportunity. It's a waste of position. And when you get up and you look at yourself in the mirror every morning, you should be saying to yourself, right, what am I going to actually try and achieve here today? And I think a lot of us need to start asking ourselves that question a bit more, and we need to start holding mirrors up to ourselves and not always saying, this problem is created because it's the DUP's fault or it's Sinn Féin's fault or it's Boris's fault or whatever. It's usually always Boris's fault, but we need to hold a mirror up and say, look, what am I doing here? How am I contributing to this problem, and how am I going to be part of the solution?
How hard is it to stay in politics when that's what you're encountering all the time? Like when you're encountering people banging the table, shouting, making points that they know are just playing to their base.
Well, I suppose you have to keep focusing in on what you're in politics for. And if you're in politics because you want to try to help people, then that's your motivation and that's what keeps you through. And, you can take all the negativity. The problem, I think, now is that you're severely limited in what you can do for your constituents. So there's a lot of negativity without the kind of reward of being able to help people. And I know there's a number of, like in the north, there's a lot of MLAs across all parties, to be fair, who are really struggling with that. So we've seen, Simon Hamilton of the DUP has left, and Stephen Agnew was he's a Green Party MLA, former party leader there. He's now left. And that's a concern of mine, that we might see more of that happening because, people are just personally finding it very demotivating and they're really struggling.
And there'll probably be an election soon. There could well be one, but before this show is broadcast. But do you expect there to be any change, like in Britain, first of all, but also in Northern Ireland? Do you see like the SDLP making any? I know you're going to sit here and say you are going to make progress, but like realistic.
No, I think we will win seats. I do genuinely believe that.
Did the European elections not kind of knock you a bit, because there was no real, like, you're down a few thousand in your vote?
Well, we increased our European vote from the council election just a bit before that, so there is, we're holding an increase in. There was a lot going on in the European election. I think the Ulster Unionist message around Europe, wasn't resonating with some, and we've seen that go to the leader of the Alliance Party and all of that. But look, this Westminster election, it's completely different, I think, from any that's gone before, because of what's happening in Parliament, because of Brexit, because the impact of all of that is going to be so severe on people living in Northern Ireland. So I think, and there's a lot of interest in politics, bizarrely. So I think people are more aware now of the impact of what's happening in Westminster. So we have all of that to play for.
And when you see those other people leaving politics, do you think maybe I'll do the same?
I think when you're human in any job, you have to keep asking yourself, are you in it for the right reasons? You don't want to be coasting along. But I'm not going to lie and say that it's not difficult to be in politics right now. It's extremely frustrating. It's frustrating for me just even being mummy. I want a really good education system for my children. I want them to be able to achieve much more than I have. I want that for everybody. And that's being denied. And, I know for me it's about making a difference, so I have to keep asking myself, is this the best way for me to do it? And I still believe that it is. And I believe now more than ever, you have to kind of stick with it, because you cannot accept that this is as good as it gets. You just can't. People deserve better. And, with everything that's happening, I have to remain optimistic and hope that people will say, sorry, we do deserve better from our politicians, all of you. And then we'll all up our game.
You wouldn't give a 10-year prediction, which was probably stupid of me to ask, considering what we're talking about and how volatile it is. Yeah. But do you, where do you see it ending up over the next 6 weeks now, like with no deal on the table still? Is it becoming a little less likely?
I don't know, because even though Boris Johnson is saying no deal, we just know through experience and watching his behaviour that that's not a guarantee that is what he's actually playing for or doing. But I think because of the time is running out, it's very volatile. I do think that what we're going to find ourselves in is a Northern Ireland only backstop. And I think that's the position that we're going to end up in after all of this. And all of the money, the millions of pounds that have gone into contingency planning for a no deal, I am of the view that is where we will end up. Which is
where we began.
And all of the stress, all of the public money that's been wasted that should have been put into health and education, all of those things squandered, and people pitted against one another to come back to where you started off. I hope I'm wrong.
We'd leave it there. Nichola Mallon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed talking to Nichola today. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to Ireland Unfiltered on all the usual channels. And if you like the show, please leave a review.